Breaking just into our newsroom, Afghan health officials say one person is dead and 6 others wounded after the Taliban violently dispersed a protest. This morning, the U.S. government is working to evacuate as many as 11,000 Americans still in Afghanistan.
And in their first press conference since seizing power, the Taliban promised amnesty for all those who've worked with American and NATO forces. Here's the main spokesman through a translator.
We are assuring the safety of all those who have worked with the United States and allied forces. As for their talents and their skills, we do not want them to leave the country. We want them to serve their own homeland.
Still, thousands of Afghan women and girls are sheltering in their homes, wary of the Taliban's promises.
And we wanted to share some more insight into the Taliban's practices. DU's director for the Center for Middle East Studies, Professor Nader Hashemi, joins us live this morning. And Professor, thank you for joining us. Obviously, a lot of fear in Afghanistan right now. We've seen the video of desperate attempts to flee the country. Can you start by explaining the differences between the type of Islamic law the Taliban practices to what's considered mainstream?
Islam, like all other of the world's great religions, is subject to multiple different interpretations. You know, we understand that when we talk about Christianity and Judaism, Hinduism, etc. We should also understand that when it comes to the case of Islam. So in the case of the Taliban in Afghanistan, let's remember that Afghanistan is one of the most traditional, underdeveloped, and war-ravaged parts of the world. The Taliban are largely a tribal organization. They have a medieval worldview. So when you give them political power, the type of Islam that they're going to interpret is going to reflect the social conditions in which they live in. Other members of the global Muslim community, particularly those living in liberal democracies like the United States, take the same sacred text of Islam, in this case, the Quran, and they're able to interpret Islam in a way that's compatible with human rights and democracy. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Context matters. Who's doing the interpreting? To what extent, is there freedom of the press and freedom of dissent to challenge interpretations? If that's the case, then you can have interpretations of all religions that are much more, I think, modern and human rights friendly. If you don't have those things in place, then you're going to get interpretations of religion that look very similar to what the Taliban are doing today in Afghanistan.
Right.
Their treatment of women and children in particular was brutal when they were in power before. Kids were taken as child brides. Women weren't allowed to be outside their homes. So are the people of Afghanistan going to see that again, do you think?
I think so. If you saw the press conference yesterday that the Taliban gave in Kabul, there's a clear attempt to seek international legitimacy by saying that the Taliban are going to respect women's rights, are going to respect press freedom. They don't want to persecute anyone. There'll be a general amnesty. No one should believe that. Yesterday, I just read a Human Rights Watch report of what life is like in those parts of Afghanistan that have been recently conquered by the Taliban. And if you read that document by Human Rights Watch, it confirms our worst suspicions. So I think, what we're hearing right now is largely a public relations exercise from the Taliban. They want, they want recognition. They want a seat at the United Nations. No one should believe their words. We should judge them by their actions.
And they're putting up a front that they want a peaceful transition of power. I mean, is that possible? And then what would need to happen to make it possible?
Well, I mean, effectively, they've conquered the entire country, so the conflict is effectively over. So there'll be a transition to Taliban rule. But the real question here is what happens once they consolidate control? What happens to the millions of Afghan women and girls who were able to go to school, were able to have jobs? I mean, that's the biggest concern here. And there's a lot to be concerned about given the Taliban's, past behavior, but also their more recent behavior in parts of Afghanistan that have recently been conquered by the Taliban. Officially, they claim that they say they support women's education, but in effect, they only support the right to education up to grade 6. After that, they oppose female education. So there'll be the war will come to an end, but then that's when the real, I think, tragedy begins, because all of these groups that enjoyed some sort of freedom under the former regime, all of them will be, I think, effectively persecuted, and we're just going to have to, unfortunately, watch this trauma unfold before our eyes.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to think of the women and children there. The United States is trying to get people out there, ramping up some of their efforts today. For those with friends and family in this situation, what is your message to them?
Well, I mean, it's not a pretty picture. I think to those that can get to a foreign consulate, a foreign embassy, for those that can leave Afghanistan, I encourage them to do so. I think that the challenge right now is to figure out, what the world can do to help those that are left behind. It's important to point out that the Taliban does have international allies that have influence over the Taliban, specifically Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. I think those are countries that happen to be U.S. allies. So I think there's a role here that the United States possibly can play indirectly by pressing those countries that are sympathetic or supportive of the Taliban to allow people who want to escape to leave the country, hoping that they can get a better life somewhere else. But that's also places an onus on Western countries like the United States to accept more refugees. And of course, that's a controversial issue here in the United States when there's a lot of anti-immigration sort of sentiment in this country. So that's one of the challenges that we have to face internally here as Americans.
Professor, and to that end, before we let you go here, do you think it is reasonable to think that the Taliban can help control other extremist groups like Al-Qaeda with them being in power?
Well, that's a big question. I mean, that's how this conflict in many ways began when the Taliban gave safe haven to Al-Qaeda, leading to the events on 9/11. So they're going to have to make a decision in terms of what type of government and what type of country they want to run. If they give safe haven to extremist groups, then in many ways we will likely see a repeat of the events that led up to 9/11. That will invite foreign military airstrikes, and it will expand sort of conflict in Afghanistan. So that's going to be one of the big challenges for the Taliban. They're claiming that they don't want to give safe haven to these extremist groups, but unfortunately there's evidence to suggest that these extremist groups are already in place in Afghanistan. So something to watch for.
Yeah, contradiction around every corner.
Yeah, the whole world will be watching. Professor Hashemi, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
All right.